coaching company
Cool.
based in New Zealand, business partner Marty there. LTV to CAC is 1 to 15.
Cool.
Challenge at the moment is we've scaled very nicely, but we've kind of outgrown our leadership comp structures. So like, we were like, if we achieve X, then happy days, you're gonna have bonus of Y, but we've all just gone like that, and now everybody's achieving X, and everyone gets a bonus, but that's now kind of capped out. How do we scale comp as we scale growth?
Oh no, that's a Layla question.
Okay, so right now, can you tell me exactly what it's based off of?
Based off, it was different by department. So it's based off total sales, churn, and total number of booked triages, which is our first sales call.
And how often do you
We're paying it out monthly based on monthly metrics, and we could renegotiate at any point, I suppose, but don't want to do that and then outgrow it again in 5 months' time.
Right. So when did you put it into place? How long ago?
Varying by head of department by 6 months to 12 months.
Okay, that makes sense. So I will say this. I think that for most compensation structures, you really have like a couple different things you can think about, which is like you have, for compensation, there's really leadership compensation, and then there's technical tracks of compensation, meaning you have the tracks for how you're going to compensate your leadership, and then there's the tracks for how you're going to compensate individual contributors, and those both can have bonus structures. So how I suggest that people do it for leadership is basically you pool your leaders into, you chunk them by, maybe you have executive team, you've got a director team, you've got a manager team, right? Some people in here, they're only going to have one team, so you might only have one team right now. Most compensation structures in general, you want to review annually. So I might put in place a structure, and I know that within 3 to 4 quarters, it's probably going to outgrow, so I'm going to have to redo it. So that's just like something that you want to put out there for people in general. When it comes to leadership compensation, I typically like a structure where the highest level of leaders are tied to some kind of profit share with the business. So like a very like P-safe metric is like, you can put aside 10% of profits for a profit share pool, and then you get to dedicate that to your highest level of leaders.
Sure.
Now, if you don't have a lot of them right now, maybe you only give 1% to your CMO, 1% to your COO, 1% to your CFO, and you have 7% left. You don't give that to anybody because you're waiting to fill those seats. That's top level. Second level would be something of like, if you have your mid to high level leaders, it might be that they get their annual pay plus they get a bonus that could be anywhere between, based on their experience and their expertise, 20 to 100% of their annual salary they can earn up to in a bonus, right? And if they are less experienced, it is on the lower end. If they're more experienced and unique and hard to find, it's on the higher end. Then you've got the level down from there, which I usually would say is annual salary plus anywhere between 10 to 35% of annual salary as a bonus.
Sure.
That's a structure that I think is pretty safe to follow and works pretty well. How people achieve those metrics, I base them off of the goals of the company. This is all coming back to your question.
Yeah.
So for each level, they're tied to the highest level is profit share, right? So that is 100%, like it is individual and business, it is all the things, it goes into profit. The levels below that, I tie it to what I call like a management by objective structure, MBO. And so essentially anywhere between 40 to 60% of their pay is tied to the company performance. And anywhere between 40 and 60% of their pay is tied to their individual performance. Based on what level of experience they are and how autonomous your team are, that's where I say like you can sway either way. I usually do it like 60% of your bonus is tied to company performance and 40% to individual for both levels of leadership. I like that structure the most. And then when it comes to, okay, what is company performance? This is for leaders, right? I'm going to say that it's going to be probably 2 to 3 metrics. It can be revenue and profit, or my favorite is revenue, profit, and growth. Because I don't really want to bonus people the same as last year if we fucking stayed the same. Like, I'm like, great, we didn't grow, amazing. Congratulations, we fucking suck, So I like the growth metric. And then the individual I tie to, we do company planning. And when you do the company planning, you're figuring out what are the objectives of the business for the year. Then you tie that down to what are the objectives for each department for each quarter. And so that is what I would tie in the beginning to people's compensation when you are growing fast. Here's why. Because, so recently I literally am doing this in a company right now that just went from, it's one of our portfolio companies went from 45 million to 75 million to we're going to cap at like 115 million this year. And they're like, how do we comp, like what KPIs? Because the KPIs are changing. And I was like, listen, fuck the KPIs. It is technically better to go with KPIs. However, when they continue to change because the business is growing so quickly, I prefer to tie it to something not as precise but more useful, which is our quarterly objectives. So for leaders and even individual contributors, I said, let's tie it to their quarterly objectives rather than metrics until we get to a point where the metrics have enough of a baseline that they're reliable and we can properly compensate people off of them. Does that make sense?
It does. I think I understood all of it,
Okay.
except for one clarifying piece.
For sure.
So you're saying that the total package would be basically 50% base and 50% variable comp?
No,
You're
so
saying,
for the leadership compensation,
yeah,
they get their base.
yeah,
This is just an easy suggestion. They
Yeah.
have a base, and then they also have a bonus. The bonus can be, say your base is $300,000,
yeah,
and you're less experienced. So I'm going to say, okay, yeah. So say your base is $100,000. You're less experienced. So I'm going to say I'm going to give you up to 20% of that $100,000
Sure.
you can earn as a bonus.
yeah, cool.
So of that, the 20,000 is based off of 60% of it is based off of company goals, and 40% of it is based off of your individual goals.
Yeah.
Which means, whatever, 12,000 and 8,000.
Perfect. Thank you for that.
Yep.
Appreciate
absolutely.
it.
For sure.
Cheers.
And that way it balances it so that if somebody just crushes, but like the company doesn't, they still get some slice of it. On the flip side, maybe they had to reroute their role, and the company crushed it, but they didn't do their individuals, but the company overall won, right? And if neither of those things happen, then you're like, all right, well, you sucked, the company sucked, so no one gets bonuses.
And I will just say one thing for everyone here when it comes to compensation, which is be really careful what you compensate on, because oftentimes I am not the biggest fan of compensating people on metrics that are purely individual, because then what you do is you create competition. Because if they're only if their metrics are, if they're only bonused off of metrics that are completely aligned to them and nobody else, then what incentive do they have to be a teammate? What incentive do they have to help people? What incentive do they have to help the other department when the other department needs them to hit their goals?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
The instance that we had was the marketing manager was comped on Total Triage's book. All she did was just write data.
Of course.
Right. Oh, sweet.
So-
I never paid extra ad spend and your bonus.
So here's something else to think about. If you have metrics you compensate people on, I always say you want a push metric and a pull metric, which is like, how do I know they're winning? And how do I know they're not fucking up other people's work with this metric? So like sales, it might be like, I'm gonna compensate you on sales, and you get deductions for backouts or refunds. So like gym launch, if people backed out in the first 4 weeks, that deducted against sales. Because we know that if someone backs out in the first 4 weeks, it's typically a sales issue. There are also no perfect metrics, so some of you are thinking, well, what if that wasn't yeah, fuck it, there's no perfect metrics. Nobody is completely honestly controlling any metric in the business, and people will always use that as like, well, I don't think I should be compensated. It's like, yes, business isn't perfect. There are no perfect compensation solutions, so I would just leave it at that.
And that goes for any kind of compensation metric, having paired metrics, and they're typically a quantity and quality metric that are paired. So if it's like you own a cleaning business, it's like how many did you clean, but how many did you have to go back and re-clean because they weren't good, right? So just having those, customer service, how many tickets did you fill, but how many, like what was the average star? Same idea. Like usually they're paired that way to manage it.
If you're a business owner and you are not growing as fast as you'd like, I'd like to give you a free gift. So my team and I put together the $100 million scaling roadmap, which is basically 200 hours of us looking over all the portfolio companies we've had and what stages of growth they went through, and more importantly, where they got stuck and how they got past it. And so we broke it into these 10 stages, and we made this little kind of quiz thing where if you put in your business information, it'll tell you where you're at, and the most important part for you, what to do for each of the functions of the business across product, marketing, sales, customer success, recruiting, IT, human resources, and finance. And so no matter what you're struggling with, someone else has already struggled with it and solved it. And so I'd like to give you this thing absolutely free. You can go to acquisition.com/roadmap, plug in your business information. And if you want us to actually help you deconstrain the business and you're trying to scale, we'd love to help you out. On the thank you page, you can just book a call with my team and we will look at the business, see if we can help. And if we can, we'll invite you out to Vegas and we'll do this in person live.